I'm an artist, the most irrelevant fucking person you can find in one level. I don't bring food, I don't bring heat, I don't bring buildings. But I do bring a pencil and a piece of paper, and I do sit in front of you and I make a drawing of you, whether you're in jail or whether you're in a refugee camp in the middle of the South Sudan or wherever you are in Aleppo. Everybody seems to understand the portrait. Everybody knows that this is the valuing of the person, that that's what it is. I am Brian Maguire. I'm a painter. I come from Ireland. I was born in Ireland actually 70 years ago. I came from a tiny terraced block in the centre of a small town. My mother was an orphan, came from Wexford, further south. My father was from the north, which was significant. And indeed, it had affected how he could be, the work he could do and stuff. Because he was from the north, they weren't taught Irish. When he came south and tried to study to be a school teacher, he didn't have Irish and therefore was excluded. We grew up with a sense of we were from a place that we weren't from. I wasn't from Wicklow, I was from Fermanagh, even though I only set foot in it once. Do you understand me? It was the songs that were sung were from the north, in the house. We grew up in this terrace block, which was in the middle of the town. And it was a town where it was a block which was available to anybody to rent. Now, in Ireland, there isn't the tradition that there is in Europe of renting places to live. You either owned your own house or you had a local authority house. And we were in the middle of this. We didn't own our house, but it wasn't a local authority house. Many of the kids on my street, their parents didn't live with them. The grandparents lived with them for whatever reason. We were kind of beaten up by gangs from one area of the town and excluded, when we became teenagers and stuff, excluded from the social gatherings of others. So there was a sense of being outsiders, which came because my father and mother were both outside, had moved to, and weren't wealthy. For many reasons, my kind of personal development was a disaster in going into puberty, going into early teenage years. It was a complete fucking disaster. You know, I became so withdrawn. I would go home. I wouldn't go home through the main street where all the young people were. I'd go around the back and up, you know. I became ashamed of myself. And the place I found peace and pleasure was in the cinema. So I would go to the cinema see every film that came to the town. There was one movie, yeah, Mein Kampf. It was a documentary made by the Americans, I believe. I don't know for sure, but I think it was they. I think it was made for German youth to be shown in Germany. It was of the camps, of the rise of Hitler and of the camps, but very graphic images from the camps. And I saw it at the age of 14. And I do believe that I can do this work that's in this show because of that. I went to the College of Art when I was in '69. I began to paint, and the first thing I did was my own story. And then after I painted my own story, I began to paint the stories of the people around me, you know, in Dublin and that. When I read the story of the women being killed in Juarez, here we had brown, female, young, factory workers. You know, on any of those 4 criteria, they are below in the class structure of society. And I said, you know, this is what I do. I tell these type of stories. So I went to Houston. I found someone there who introduced me to someone in Juarez, and suddenly I'm in people's kitchens, hearing the story of their daughter. And I started making the paintings and so on. And that's led to this work here, all this work in this room. Syria came from, I was reading about Syria in the papers and it didn't fit. There's something fucking wrong. It didn't make sense to me. So I wanted to go and find out myself. Orwell talks about how in war you can believe nothing, but you might believe what you see, but because you see only such a small segment, even that's under trouble. So I take that on board, but I still went to Syria. I spent a lot of time in Juarez. Remember I talked to you about being a kid going to England to work under my brother's papers. That was my experience. These men here that died, their bones are in the desert. That's all they were doing. Going to a different country to work under false papers. Look at them. Look at the remains. Laura Marlowe, who's the Paris correspondent of the Irish Times, she was the one who first said that you work like a journalist. Your method of working is like a journalist. I go find out the story and look for the image, you know. Yeah, I'm aware of that. You know, it's you know, I even went so far for these 3 paintings. Well, this one here, the images came from The Guardian. They first went to the Houston Chronicle and then they sent it to The Guardian. Guardian's, some guy in The Guardian, it was Ed Villamy sent it to me in The Guardian. I kind of reversed the idea of embedded journalism in the American army and stuff in Iraq. Well, I decided to reverse that and I embedded myself in a newsroom so as I could and look at, you know, basically thousands of photographs. Look at the daily photograph for 2 years. So 700 days, all the photographs of the day. And just went through them all, took what I wanted. The newspaper allowed me to do that. There is a relationship between the way I work and the way I collect stuff and journalists. The concept of a painting is made by hand. Go back to the portrait, the drawing of there's something in this between. I mean, in teaching drawing to young people, I used to talk about a way of looking, equivalent to the way, like when you're young, you look at one person in a room, be it boy or girl, but there's only one that you have eyes for, and you'll spend all day looking at them. That is the way of looking that you need. So there is a connection between love and looking, which is not in the camera. The camera doesn't love when it looks. I know it can be manipulated. It's an interesting exhibition for me because it draws together three distinctly separate projects and adds two as a counterpoint on the way in. The Opera House in Chile and the border in Northern Ireland are, the Chile is one of the earliest works. It is the earliest work, and the border is more recent. This work here is 2013, 16, 13, 15 and 16, and they all come from Juarez. So it's really one set of works, but the piece behind me, Massacre, was a centerpiece in a show presented in 2016. This was an early work of that project, one of the first of those works. And this was a work made after the show had opened, and I came back to Paris, and I went and made that piece. It was the final piece of that work. This here is the Arizona project. It's only beginning. It's three of the pieces. The first piece made last January in Paris. The other two pieces made during the lockdown in Ireland. They will eventually be 8 pieces, 8 works, and we'll have a museum show and publication in September in Ireland. I collected photographic information taken with iPhones by policemen on 90 cases. There is a determination to do this, to make this show. It's brutal. I mean, when I selected from the cases, I had 460 cases to look at. There was one group I didn't take. It was too brutal for me. I didn't know I had a limit, you know. I just remember seeing paintings from Napoleonic times, and obviously Goya, who, if he hadn't have done these, we'd know nothing. You know, that's what I felt when I looked at Goya's Prisoners. It was a show here about prison down in the Quai d'Orsay some years ago. So I kind of willfully make these works. I decide to do it. I get the photos, I fucking print them, I select, I do them one at a time. It's a willful act. Aleppo was made because I said, fuck's sake, they're destroying the oldest city in the world. For whatever reason, it's been destroyed. Somebody needs to record it, to put it in front. All this stuff it goes from being this to a gravestone. It's somewhere in that. That's the kind of band in which I work, and I'm quite sure it's not needed. But you know, it's about making the invisible visible.